Well, we're continuing on in our study of the 7 deadly sins. If this is your first Sunday, this is the third weekend, or I did an introduction week, I believe, so it's the fourth week in the series, but the 7 deadly sins of pride, envy, gluttony, lust, sloth, anger, and greed. Those 7 ingrained inclinations which are seen as the source of the sinful dysfunction in our lives. And that's why they're called the deadly sins, or the capital sins, the source sins. It's a sound of life, I love it. This list of the 7 deadly sins has been used throughout church history as kind of a diagnostic aid, a mirror for the soul, moral and spiritual inventory when we do a fearless and searching moral inventory of our lives using 12-step language there. And so we have done an exam on pride and on anger, and this morning we look at the deadly sin of sloth. And honestly, our initial reaction to that is, and why is sloth even on the list? I mean, come on, it's certainly not one of the big 7. But sloth is possibly the sin that is most misunderstood in the 7. The word sloth makes us think of this cute and cuddly little creature. Now, isn't that a face that every mother could love? Yeah. A 3-toed sloth moves at a maximum ground speed of 6.5 feet per minute. Whoa. 0 to 6.5 feet in a minute. And from that verb sloth, then we get this concept of physical and mental inactivity, sluggishness, idleness, laziness. We even joke about being a couch potato, and we justify that because we all need downtime. And it is true, we need restorative downtime. The word recreation, you're aware of this, such an enlightening word, recreation. It's supposed to recreate us. It's supposed to restore us. And so much of our activity is not recreational. Have you shown the picture of the cute and cuddly couch potato? Have we gone past that already? Next one. It didn't show up as a big fat guy laying on the couch. Okay, sorry, I thought I'd check that. Well, so there are 3 aspects to slothfulness that we want to address. I will. The first is, of course, just this component of laziness to this deadly sin. Sloth is laziness. And much of what the Bible says about sloth as laziness is found in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 6. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? The sluggard is saying, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. But poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. Just let me sleep a little longer. I'll get around to it eventually. The slothful person is referred to as the sluggard or the slacker in the book of Proverbs, the lazy procrastinator. And you'll find about 20 verses in the Proverbs about the sluggard or the slacker. Proverbs 22, one more example. The sluggard says, there's a lion outside. I'll be killed in the public square. What's going on there? That's the sluggard's excuse for not getting out of bed. I might get eaten by a lion. And a lazy individual can create some of the lamest excuses ever to just justify their laziness. This is one of my very, very favorite quotes. I can't remember if I put it up there or not, from a man named Bob Mohoa. Yes. You can't make footprints in the sands of time if you're sitting on your butt. And who wants to make butt prints in the sands of time? That's awesome. That is a great quote. I've always wanted to create a visual for that. You get the message. The sluggard leaves only bud prints in the sands of time. Now, in a clever and a very inspirational twist on that phrase, this man named Sean Stephenson, he wrote a book that was entitled "Get Off Your Butt: How to End Self-Sabotage and Stand Up for Yourself." Sean was born with a disease called brittle bone disease, just a lifelong genetic disorder. By the time he was 18, he had suffered over 200 fractures. He reached an adult height of only 3 feet, was permanently confined to the wheelchair. And faced with just that army of reasons to embrace self-pity, he chose instead not to succumb to all of those negative voices and the excuse-making. He got off of his excuse-making, but, and off of his booty. Graduated from college, went on to be a very successful motivational speaker and writer. No one is inspired by a sluggard. Sean Stephenson is incredibly inspirational. And so maybe the best way to understand why sloth is considered to be such a serious sin is to think of the opposite of sloth. Because the opposite of slothful laziness is this virtue we want to cultivate in our life of diligence. Great word. Diligence, this powerful sense of responsibility. A dedication to hard work, a dedication to a mission, a conscientious completion of our duties. And that flows in part out of Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. You know the verse. For we are God's handiwork, his masterpiece, his work of art. God created us, and he created us in Christ Jesus, the verse says, to do good works. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works. And we're going to be held accountable by God for the work we do or we don't do. Efforts like Sean Stephenson's give worth and dignity and meaning to life. It honors God. It pleases our Creator when we are diligent to the task. Diligence, the telltale root of that word, diligence, is a Latin word, diligere, and it means to love. Diligence and dedication are an expression of love and devotion to our Creator, who created us for good works. So sloth becomes a sin, not merely because it makes us unproductive, but because of the lack of love that lies behind the laziness. Laziness is a lack of effort that is rooted in a lack of love. Paul tells Timothy, do not neglect your gift, and God has given every one of his children a spiritual gift to be used for the good of others. He gives everyone a gift. Do not neglect your gift. Be diligent in these matters. Give yourself wholly to them. I came across these lyrics. I think it's from a rap song. Do you know the rap song Couch Potato? Never heard it? Last time you were here, I did a rap song. Yeah. Yo. Yeah, bro. My rap and roll right there. Well, so the lyrics are, and I'm not going to try to rap it because I don't know the song. But rap music is not really music. It's not. It's verbalization, as Robert taught me. It's not music. The life you're living is pretty sad to me. You left your brain somewhere on channel 3. You vegetated until you're a dud. How long you planning to remain a spud? I didn't say they were good lyrics. But a sluggard, a slacker, a spud. Yes, a couch potato. Sloth as laziness is the most obvious aspect of this deadly sin. But when the list of 7 deadly sins was developed, laziness was not the primary emphasis in slothfulness. That's not what the composers of these 7 deadly sins were really trying to communicate. Sloth was, for them, primarily spiritual indifference. That's the sin. And the term that these early church fathers used was the Greek word akedia. Is that up there? Not that that is important, I just want you to see the root of it. And so akedia, you have the A, the alpha privative there, the negative, plus the noun kadas, which meant care. So akedia meant without care. A lack of care, meaning indifference. Behind sloth is this sort of affectlessness, a feeling, a lack of feeling for others, a mindset that gives rise to apathy and boredom and indifference and then hopelessness that finds its expression in idleness. But behind the idleness is this akedia, lack of care. So you imagine a teenager saying, I don't care. I don't care. Well, you need to study. You won't graduate if you don't pass this. I don't care. I don't care. There's just this despondency in those words. They really don't care. And then that's probably followed up with another saying, I'm bored. I'm bored. I don't care. And in our sort of hyper-stimulated modern world with just an abundance of entertainment options, we go, you're bored. Yes, they are. And we'll come back to that. So the emphasis in sloth as akedia was not the inactivity, but it was the apathy behind the inactivity. The key to addressing sloth is not a proper level of activity, but a proper attitude of the heart. The way to recognize the slothfulness or the seriousness of sloth is to consider that relationship again between sloth and love. Because sloth is not just a lack of activity, it's the result of apathy. The reason I don't want to do anything is because I really don't care. I don't care. It's important for us to understand, I'm repeating this, I know, but sloth as a sin is not about sleeping in late in the morning. It is about not loving people. And the early church fathers would say, sloth is not so much about being lazy at work, but being lazy about love. So it was slothfulness that Jesus condemns in the church of Laodicea. Familiar with this, the 7 letters to the 7 churches in Revelation chapter 2 and 3. So Jesus says to this church of Laodicea, I know your deeds. Of course he knows our deeds. That you are neither hot nor cold. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, you're spiritually indifferent, you're apathetic, you're neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you, vomit you is the word, out of my mouth. You say I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing, but you do not realize, oh, what a tremendous blind spot. We all have blind spots, but this was their blind spot. You don't realize you're wretched and pitiful and poor and blind and naked. Now, these people in the church of Laodicea were not lazy, if we understand laziness as idleness. They were industrious. They were busy. And as a result, they had acquired wealth. They lived a comfortable lifestyle. But then they started just going through the motions in their spiritual lives, falling out of love, in a sense, with God. Their lives have been marked by busyness. But a workaholic can be a sloth in the spiritual sense of that word. You can bury yourself in your work. You can grow increasingly neglectful and indifferent to your spiritual life while you're doing that. The Bible calls that sloth. And the church in America is the Laodicean church. busy about this deep spiritually. George Gallup concluded from one of his polls that only 10% of Americans have what he termed a transforming faith. And by transforming faith, he meant a person's faith makes a discernible difference in how they live. And that is really a harsh sort of a verdict on our lives. If you say you are a follower of Jesus and there is no discernible, detectable difference in how you live, you actually become a hindrance to the advancement of the kingdom. You are neither useful nor appealing. The non-Christian world is not saying, I want whatever you have. That is so attractive to me. There's something about your character that's just so appealing. No, they're saying black. And that's what Jesus' words, when I spit you out of my mouth. Harsh words to the church. Peter Kreeft, kind of a philosopher, I think he's a Catholic theologian. I haven't read anything by him for a long time, but Peter Kreeft said, sloth is a cold sin, not a hot one. But that makes it even deadlier. God can more easily cool our wrath than fire our frozenness. Sloth is a sin of omission, not commission. That makes it deadlier for a similar reason. Sloth simply does not play God's game. And so we read admonitions like this. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. New Living Translation translates it this way. Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. And we're familiar with the Colossians 3:1. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord. And I chose those verses because they reveal for us the opposite virtue that we should seek to have displayed in our character. As the Spirit does that transforming work in our life, our goal is not to stop sloth. Our goal is to become this over here. And that goal is zeal, being fervent in spirit, being wholehearted, being enthusiastic. That's the opposite of akadia. I love that word, enthusiasm, derived from the Greek word enthos, in, with, theos or theos, God within, enthusiasm. Boy, we need enthusiastic people surrounding us, don't we? Henry David Thoreau said, none are so old as those who have outlived enthusiasm. You go, man, that is true. None are so old as those who have outlived enthusiasm. It's not the physical aches and pains that make me feel old as much as those times when you lose enthusiasm. You lose that sort of purpose and mission and drive in your life, then you really feel old. Fitting statement for the church in Laodicea and for much of the church in our society. We have lost enthos, enthusiasm. We are a lazy society. We really are. Government policies enable us. Government policies perpetuate slothful idleness, and lukewarm Christianity perpetuates slothful, loveless spirituality. It really should be convicting that we display so much enthusiasm or so much passion for some stupid sports team or some material possessions, but so little for God. We have become slothful. Where's the zeal? Where's the hunger for God? And people will say, well, I just don't have the time. I'm so busy. But again, you can be busy. You can be a workaholic and be a sloth in the sense of this word, akadia. Yes. I'm so busy. We make time for things that are truly important, and the way we spend our time tells us what is important to us. The real question is how serious are you? Okay. There's a third aspect. I want to talk to you about sloth as an emotion. Because when Thomas Aquinas wrote about the deadly sin of sloth, he used a Latin term that meant sorrow. Aquinas' focus was on the emotion that accompanied the behavior. Okay, so there is that lazy behavior, but Aquinas' emphasis was on the emotion, the heaviness, the listlessness, the hopelessness, the sadness. Sounds like depression. And, well, there is comorbidity between sinfulness or slothfulness and depression. There's this sort of symbiotic relationship, if I'm using that term correctly, that symbiotic relationship between sloth and lazy and depression, just like there is between sloth and addiction. That's the easiest one to see. A person who drinks or abuses drugs, they're just prone to inactivity. That's why we call them a stoner. And they're apathetic, which leads to resignation and a lack of motivation. And, well, what do? Well, let's just go get wasted. And there's this cycle that goes down. And the same is true then with this emotion of depression. I feel helpless and hopeless and just sad. That leads to inactivity. That inactivity leads to greater, heavier emotion. I'm not suggesting that depression is sin. I'm just acknowledging how complex sometimes this is, this spiritual, psychological, mental health sort of issue. So slothfulness, again, for Aquinas, the emphasis was not on simple inactivity. It was that sad sin that leads us, to ignore the hand, this gracious open hand of God, to turn away from that. That's seen in this Matthew account. The rich ruler is how we know this, the rich young ruler. And then Jesus invites this man to be his disciple, and then he told him the requirements for discipleship. And you remember what happened? Here we go, Matthew 19. And when the young man heard this, he went away sad. He turned away sorrowfully. There's this incredible sense of dejection. But he didn't walk away from Jesus as much as he failed to move toward Jesus. He could not bring himself to step toward the God who had moved toward him. That's what Aquinas was pointing out. He went away sad because he had great wealth. Okay. Now, I want to wrap all of this together and see how they're all connected. I'm going to frame this like I do so often from that sort of cognitive behavioral therapist perspective. Our beliefs inform our emotions. Our emotions put us in motion and produce a behavior. Behind the behavior, laziness. Acting like a sluggard, a slackard, a spud. That's the behavior. Behind that is an emotion. This whole family of emotion that are related to that sort of depressive family, that sadness, that hopelessness. But those emotions come from a flawed belief system. So the behavior, slothfulness, the emotion, Aquinas' comments on sadness, the belief was actually that that lack of care. That's the faulty belief. The teenager says, I don't care. I'm bored. That's their belief. That's their truth. The emotions that flow from that are all those heavy hopelessness sort of emotions and so much more. And those emotions put us in motion and produce a behavior. And none of those behaviors are going to be diligent productivity. Right? You see how that all flows together. And what all of that sounds like to me, as I was thinking, that's the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, I love that book. Book of Ecclesiastes, much of it's written by Solomon from the perspective of the secular skeptic. He takes that position and he goes, okay, let's imagine life without God in the picture. There is no God. And then he reasons through life from that perspective, and his conclusion always is meaningless. It's just meaningless. I'm bored. I don't care. Why should I care? Nothing makes sense. And so the opposite virtue of sloth that we want to cultivate in our life is actually joyfulness. But the source of joy is the relationship with our Creator and the hope that we possess because of the confidence that we have in Him. That's the conclusion that the whole book of Ecclesiastes eventually comes to. Remember your Creator. There's joy in your Creator. Life makes sense when you know your Creator. Life feels like there's purpose when you know your Creator. And that's how we deal with the behavior of slothfulness. You can't change your behavior until you change your belief system, right? Well, there we go. And when we face and when we confess the sin in our life, the sin of slothfulness, what we find is not condemnation, like we might expect, but what we find is forgiveness and grace and freedom, and we recognize God has been moving toward us all the time, and we simply have been moving away or not reaching out to that open, gracious hand. And that's the beauty of our God. And we discover forgiveness and grace and the freedom that was intended for His children. Let's pray. Father, we do want this to be a spiritual assessment. We get to be complacent people, and we want your Spirit to work in our lives so that we would take a step closer to you, that our lives would be more pleasing to you, that we would sense that forgiveness and that grace and the wonder of a relationship with our Creator. That would be our prayer. And so do the work that you need to do in each of our lives in that regard. Warm our hearts. We are lukewarm people. And we want to be diligent, passionate